President Trump, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Dan Kane, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, all of them at this very moment are gathered with some other senior administration officials in the Oval Office discussing some potential next steps in combating Venezuelan drug trafficking into the United States. And of course, this largely stems from the president's Truth Social post over the long weekend that we had, where he just declared Venezuelan airspace to be closed. So what is the intended goal of President Trump's policies regarding Venezuela? Well, joining me now to talk about this is retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. He is also currently senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Admiral Montgomery, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's break this down. What does shutting down airspace actually entail? What does that look like?
Well, normally a country shuts down its own airspace by saying that we're no longer going to provide the normal control of aircraft through there, or sometimes you'll shut off airspace because you're going to do a missile test. Usually that's airspace out in the open ocean. But what the president here did was this was signaling. He said, I'm going to shut it down. And what he really meant was, I'm going to occupy it with my forces at a time and place of my choosing. And I think that was the strong signal he was sending. He's trying his hardest to convince Maduro, who is not the legitimately elected leader of Venezuela, to leave peacefully, or people around Maduro to encourage him aggressively to leave peacefully. And so I think he was stepping up the pressure campaign and gave him the 3-day weekend to think about it.
So what is this going to look like in real life? What's it going to be like, not only for Venezuelan airspace, but for other countries wanting to come and go there? I mean, what in real life is this going to look like?
So I think what's really going to happen is we're going to conduct airstrikes through that airspace. And when we do that, we will put out a notice to mariners saying, stay clear to everyone out of a certain area that's much larger than the area we're operating in, so as to not give away our exact flight planning. But and then we will probably begin to destroy the on land the factories, the storage units that are used by the narco cartels for the production and distribution of cocaine from Venezuela to the United States and Europe.
All right, so you kind of touched on it, but unpack this a little bit further for us, if you would, in terms of what President Trump is trying to accomplish through these actions.
Well, it's just interesting. Look, President Trump did not run as the candidate who will bring you regime change. But I think what he ran was the president that will bring you a secure homeland. And to him, a secure homeland means secure borders, secure missile defense. I hope someday it means a better investment in cyber. But also part of that secure border is that we won't allow illicit drugs in. Now, he's focused on fentanyl. Fentanyl's killed hundreds of thousands of Americans over the last 4 years. Now, fentanyl comes from precursor agents in China that are processed in Mexico and come to this country. I think that that's a politically and militarily more touchy issue. So initially, he's going to take care of this cocaine problem. The cocaine comes from Venezuela and Colombia. We've been shooting ships coming out of Venezuela and coming out of Colombia, a total of 21 now, and destroying them. But that's like shooting arrows instead of shooting the quiver. The quiver are the drug production facilities, and the ones in Venezuela, I imagine, are heavily targeted right now by the United States in preparation for an attack over the next few days.
This is rather unprecedented action that the president is taking. And of course, in the midst of all that, he's taking a good bit of heat from that perspective. How effective would you say the president's policies on Venezuela have been? How is this going so far?
Well, look, we're not going to stop cocaine flow to the United States by sinking individual ships, small ships. It comes in by way too many paths. I think what he's done is he's saying, Maduro, you're a narco-terrorist. You run a narco-terrorist state. The state supports the narcotics cartels in the production and distribution of cocaine. I'm going to remove you and hopefully install the democratically elected leadership, and they will take a more aggressive attitude towards blocking drugs coming to the United States. But at its core, this is a homeland security issue to President Trump. It's about keeping the homeland secure from drugs. Now, look, we'd like to get fentanyl first, and honestly, fentanyl is the much bigger deal. But what he can easily get at is cocaine, and he disliked Maduro in his first term, and I don't think his opinion on Maduro has changed at all.
So what's going to happen with all of this, in your opinion, as you, with your expertise, look at what's taking place, looking at the role of Maduro there as a narco-terrorist leader, as you describe him? What's going to happen with all of this, in your opinion?
So I think we'll conduct strikes against that the production and stowage of cocaine. We'll also strike their military assets that could impact us, their aircraft and air defense systems and their airfields. And then, we'll hope, either because, we encourage them or because, covert operations, but then Maduro gets on a plane to, Turkey or Cuba or Russia, and, eventually ends up in Moscow living next door to Hafez al-Assad, the former leader of Syria, in the dictator's row there. He is going to leave, and eventually the democratically elected government will get in there, but it gets messy. When he leaves, it's not a guaranteed thing. And I think the president would prefer not to be involved in that part of regime change. So we'll have to see what happens, but I suspect we attack, Maduro flees.
You speak that with seemingly a good bit of confidence, and I think the way you laid it out makes all the sense in the world. So you think we are on the throes of seeing a regime change in Venezuela?
Look, this has been Marco Rubio's #1 foreign policy issue for 2 decades. As a Cuban American from Miami, this is a heartfelt interest to him, a real passion interest to him. So yes, I suspect that the president is following Rubio's lead on this, and we will see these attacks. Whether we get regime change, that Maduro gets a vote on that. But if he's smart, he's going to catch that first plane out of there.
Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch. Fascinating information.